We'd like to show you that the existence of God can be proven 100% absolutely without the use of faith.
Did Jesus offer credible credentials to back up his divine claims? Well, I believe the evidence is overwhelming that he did.
All this brings us to the 10th lie that Christians tell and why they tell it: that there is evidence for the existence of some God. But here are the facts. The Random House Dictionary defines evidence as that which tends to prove or disprove something, grounds for belief, proof, something that makes plain or clear, or an indication or sign. Similarly, the American Heritage Dictionary defines evidence as a thing helpful in forming a conclusion or judgment, something indicative, or an outward sign. So we can define evidence as any demonstrable indication that a proposition is true. That's a good start. But we're not just talking about bad or stupid evidence. We're talking about good evidence, the kind that actually indicates the truth of a proposition, rather than the desire of the proposer to believe it. And for evidence to be good, it has to be unambiguous, meaning that it points to one particular proposition to the exclusion of others, and it has to be objectively verifiable, meaning that other people are able to observe and measure whatever it is the proposer observed or measured, and that nobody has to take the proposer's word for anything. And of course, the more people who can observe and measure the evidence, the better it is. So the complete lie is that there is any demonstrable, unambiguous, objectively verifiable, widely available indication of the existence of any God. Theists might protest that this is a very harsh standard. But please note that everything in the observable world passes this standard, like cats, dogs, and Australia. Other things that no longer exist in their original forms pass this standard, like dinosaurs. And some things that are too small to ever be directly observed with the naked eye pass this standard too, like electrons. But do you know what has never been shown to pass this standard? Catwomen, fairies, Pegasuses, unicorns, dragons, angels, demons, devils, and of course, gods and goddesses. But Christians claim that their God passes this test, and that there is evidence for their God. No other gods, just theirs. And unfortunately, there is no such thing as evidence of absence, so I cannot conclusively prove that there is no evidence for any God anywhere. But I can ask a few pointed questions. Like, if there is evidence for any God, why do Christians depend on faith? Faith means belief that the proposition is true without evidence that the proposition is true. So if there was any evidence for their God, faith would neither be necessary nor desired for maintaining belief in it. Also, if there's evidence for their God, why do Christians depend on emotional blackmail to peddle their religion? If there's any evidence that what they're saying is true, why do they have to resort to telling people that they're nothing or worthless without their religion, or scaring people with thoughts of death or horrors after death? Would any of this be necessary if they had even a shred of evidence? Similarly, if they have evidence for their God, why are there so many arguments for the existence of their God? Have you ever noticed that there are no arguments for the existence of things that actually exist, like cats, dogs, Australia, and dinosaurs? That's because there's evidence for those things, which renders arguments for their existence completely unnecessary. Also, if there's any actual evidence for any God, why do Christians keep using all of this really bad evidence, like Lee Strobel, who uses Bible verses to prove the existence and divinity of Jesus, as if he had any evidence for the truth of the Bible? As if anyone would need any further evidence from Lee Strobel if they already believed what was in the Bible. Why have none of these Christians with actual evidence for the existence of their God ever called up Ray Comfort and told him, "Hey Ray, use this real evidence I found and stop talking about fruit"? This is because they know that their evidence is no better or more convincing than anything that Ray Comfort has to offer. This is why, when Muslims present exactly the same evidence for the existence of their God, no Christians are converted to Islam by it. Christians find the evidence that Muslims present laughable and unconvincing, because it is laughable and unconvincing. And the only reason that Christians find exactly the same evidence convincing when it's used for their God, but not for anybody else's, is because they've made up their minds to be convinced by it whether or not any of it actually constitutes evidence. This is also why many Christian websites claim to have evidence for the existence of their God. But none of these websites are willing to present their evidence without first presenting the caveat that you also have to have faith, or be seeking God with your whole heart, or some other phrase that lets you know that if you don't already believe or desperately want to believe what they're saying, you'll find their evidence laughable and unconvincing as well. Atheists, Christians, and other theists all laugh at how dumb Ray Comfort is, but at least he understands that evidence is meant to convince someone of something, and is therefore utterly worthless if the person must already be convinced in order to accept any of the evidence as evidence. When he presents evidence, he at least claims that it's actual evidence, irrefutable and convincing, even though he's hopelessly wrong on all counts.
We'll be simply producing knowledge by looking at 3 irrefutable evidences for God's existence. Creation is 100% scientific proof there was a creator. You cannot have a creation without a creator. Which brings me to my second evidence of God's existence, something that God has put within each of us, the conscience. You're a self-admitted, lying, thieving, blasphemous, adulterer at heart. So hopefully, your conscience has been stirred by the commandments to show you need God's forgiveness, which brings me to the third evidence. This is the radical nature of within each of us.
And finally, if there's so much evidence for the existence of any God, why is nobody willing to just say what it is? I've posted at least 10 videos, all of which explicitly state that there is no evidence for the existence of any God. In total, these videos have been viewed at least 20,000 times, and in response, theists have left comments talking about huge volumes of evidence, accusing people who say that there is no evidence of being denialist, and invoking the name of Richard Dawkins as though he actually said any of the things they claim he said, or as if anybody has to care what he says anyway. But this brazen show of volume only betrays a complete lack of substance. If they have any evidence, why don't they just present this evidence? Wouldn't that be easier and more convincing than these endless vague allusions to the evidence they have? It would be the work of 3 minutes to utterly undo the impact of everything I've presented on YouTube thus far, by offering even one shred of evidence for the existence of their God. So why do all of these loud, brazen theists refuse to do that? The answer is obviously because they don't have any evidence, and they know they don't have any evidence, but they say they do anyway. So the truth is that there is no demonstrable, unambiguous, objectively verifiable, and widely available indication of the existence of any God. And Christians know it. The why is simple. They understand how stupid relying on faith makes them appear. They know it smacks of wishful thinking to believe something even though you have no indication that this thing is true. And they know that if it weren't for their willingness to lie, and their persistent usage of double standards when it comes to evaluating the evidence for their God, as opposed to everybody else's gods and fairy tales, they would be exposed even to themselves as frauds, hypocrites, and willfully self-deluded people. But you could prove me wrong about all that. Just show us some evidence. We'll be here.
I think everybody here can tell that there was not one piece of evidence presented at all for their God.
If you know of a lie that Christians like to tell, please send me a message with that lie and I'll make a video about it. Other than that, please rate the video, subscribe, and wait for more. There's more coming.